Shawn Michaels is one of the greatest performers in wrestling history, but back in the 90s he was also one of the most selfish and arrogant wrestlers in the business. If Shawn didn't like you, he made your life miserable. In today's video, we're taking a look at those wrestlers that Shawn Michaels absolutely hated working with and why. Before Shawn Michaels was the showstopper, he was one half of wrestling's most exciting tag team. The Rockers were spectacular to watch and they had incredible chemistry, but after years of working together, the cracks started to show. At first, Michaels and Marty Jannetty were inseparable. They wrestled together, travelled together and partied together, and after a while they started to get on each other's nerves. The tension came to a head one night in a hotel lobby in 1991. A fight broke out and blood was spilled all over the floor. It got so bad that the police were called and Randy Savage had to step in and calm the situation down between the men. They avoided getting arrested, but it was the beginning of the end for their friendship. Luckily for Shawn, Vince McMahon wanted to give him a big singles push, and so he broke up the tag team and Marty was left in the dust. With him out of the picture, Michaels found a new crew to roll with. They called themselves the Kliq, and if they didn't like you, you had a serious problem. Michaels was joined by Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, Sean Waltman and Triple H. These guys all looked out for each other backstage and they used their influence to stay at the top in the WWF, usually at the expense of everyone else around them. No one was safe. In ECW, Shane Douglas had made a big impression. He could talk, he could wrestle, and he carried himself like a main eventer. So when he arrived in the WWF, he seemed like a real prospect, someone who could get right to the top in the Federation's new generation. But none of that mattered because Shawn Michaels hated him. It started when the Kliq invited Douglas into their gang, but he decided that he wanted no part of it. And that was a big mistake on his part because the Kliq didn't take well to being rejected. And then there was the jealousy. Douglas had made a name for himself in ECW, cutting some of the most talked about promos in wrestling at the time, and he was proving there that he could hang in the main event. Michaels was desperate to be the WWF's top guy, and the last thing he wanted was Douglas walking in with all of his hype and taking that spot. Although Vince McMahon gave Douglas such a lame gimmick that he would never have managed to get over anyway, but that wasn't enough to stop the Kliq from stepping on him themselves. Michaels and Douglas had a match at In Your House 4 for the Intercontinental title. In the days before the match, Michaels told Douglas that he was going to embarrass him in the ring. Douglas stood up for himself and told Michaels that if he tried anything, then he would fight back. Not long after that, Michaels suddenly couldn't compete due to a supposed concussion. So instead of taking the loss, Michaels simply forfeited the match and handed over the belt. But then his buddy Scott Hall showed up, challenged Douglas to a match, and 11 minutes later, he was the new champion. This was a plan entirely hatched by the Kliq to make Douglas look bad and have one of their own come out as the new Intercontinental Champion. And so Douglas saw the writing on the wall and realised that with these guys around, he was never going to get anywhere in the WWF, and he left soon after. Bam Bam Bigelow was such a talented wrestler that he should have been a surefire main eventer, but he also got on the wrong side of the Kliq in 1995. Bigelow's big mistake was standing up for his friend Chris Candido. Backstage at the time, Candido's girlfriend Sunny was having an affair with Shawn. The Kliq made sure that Candido knew about the affair by taunting him backstage, rubbing it in his face that his girlfriend was cheating on him at every opportunity. And when Bam Bam stepped in to defend him, he put a massive target on his own back. Kevin Nash later said that they really liked Bam Bam as a person and never had any personal beef with him, but the Kliq were like a pack of dogs, and once they turned on someone, they didn't let go. So despite stealing the show in the main event of WrestleMania 11 against Lawrence Taylor, Bigelow never got the push that he deserved. Instead, he was quietly moved down the card before he quit the company entirely. Michaels and the Kliq had used their influence backstage over Vince McMahon to put an end to Bigelow's future in the WWF. Many years later, Bigelow described that era as a terrible time, not just for himself, but for everyone else who had to work alongside the Kliq backstage in the WWF. But what happened to Bigelow happened in the locker room. Vader, on the other hand, got humiliated in front of the entire world. From the moment they worked together, Michaels hated Vader. He thought that he was too slow, too stiff, and too clumsy. Michaels hated being beaten up in the ring, and Vader's style was built on physicality, and he was just one of those wrestlers who just hit that little bit harder, and Michaels just couldn't stand coming backstage battered and bruised. And to make matters worse, Vader had a reputation for rarely washing his ring gear, and according to Michaels, he smelled really bad. It was just never going to work between them. But this was a time when the WWF was in real need of talented main event heels, and Vader seemed to fit the bill perfectly. He was exactly the kind of scary monster bad guy that they needed, and he was very good in the ring too, but Shawn Michaels wasn't interested in that. He was just interested in getting Vader out of the main event and out of the ring with him. At SummerSlam in 1996, they wrestled for the WWF Championship. At one point in the match, Vader was supposed to roll out of the way when Michaels performed a top rope elbow, but he missed his cue. Michaels threw a tantrum in the middle of the match, and he kicked Vader in the head and screamed at him. Vader was supposed to win the title at some point in their feud, making him a permanent main eventer, but Michaels just wasn't having any of it. He went straight to Vince and buried him. After that, Vader's main event push was over, and by early 1998, he was out of the company completely. But Shawn's feud with Bret Hart felt much more personal and went on for years. At first, there was respect between the men. In the early 90s, Bret saw Shawn as a great performer, and Shawn admired Bret's technical skills, but that respect didn't last. As Bret was pushed into the main event and crowned WWF champion in 1994, Shawn sat up and took notice. He did everything he could to get to that same position, including using all of his influence over Vince McMahon. And at WrestleMania 12, it finally happened. For over 1 hour, the men wrestled each other in an Iron Man match, which was one of the most physically demanding matches of either man's career. In the end, Shawn beat Bret and won the WWF Championship for the first time in his career. After the match, Shawn didn't want Bret hanging around, and so he told him to get the fuck out of his ring. From here on out, Michaels became more and more insufferable backstage, and then things got personal. On live TV, Michaels suggested that Bret was having an affair with Sonny. That was a comment that actually affected his real-life relationship with his wife Julie. Safe to say that she didn't take too kindly to the suggestion that Bret was getting a little bit on the side, so to speak. Backstage, the men got to a point where they couldn't stand to be in the same room as each other. Tensions came to a head when they ended up brawling with each other in the locker room, with Bret ripping a chunk out of Shawn's scalp. And then came the Survivor Series in 1997 and the Montreal Screwjob. Bret was leaving the WWF to go to WCW, but there was a problem. He was still the WWF champion. He didn't want to lose the title in front of the Canadian crowd at the Survivor Series, and he certainly didn't want to lose to Shawn Michaels. But Vince McMahon wasn't taking any chances. He was paranoid that Bret was going to show up on Nitro with the title and do something stupid with it, like throw it in the trash. And so, during the match, Shawn put Bret in the sharpshooter and Vince McMahon called for the bell at ringside. But Bret never tapped out. Backstage, Shawn acted innocent, claiming that he had no idea what had just happened. But years later, the truth did come out. It turned out that Michaels had been in on the screw job the whole time. Shawn's career seemingly came to an end in 1998. He suffered a back injury during a casket match with The Undertaker, and doctors told him that his career was over. He stepped away from the business for a few years, but then he made an unexpected comeback in 2002, and this time he was like a totally different man. After years of being the most hated man in the locker room, he'd found God and cleaned up his act. People who'd worked with him during both eras commented that it was a total personality change for the better. But on one occasion, the old Shawn Michaels came back. In 2005, he entered into a feud with Hulk Hogan. The original plan was for the men to have a series of 3 matches, with Michaels winning the first match and Hogan winning the other 2. This was on the suggestion of Michaels himself, who was more than happy to lose twice to the Hulkster. But the story goes that Hogan preferred the idea of winning all 3 matches in the series and was seriously unhappy with the idea of laying down for Shawn in the first match. Michaels was reportedly and understandably furious at Hogan. He just couldn't believe that at this stage in his career, Hogan wasn't willing to lose to him flat on his back. And so, at SummerSlam in 2005, the one and only match between these 2 men took place on pay-per-view. And Shawn oversold all of Hogan's offense, bumping around the ring like a maniac in a very unrealistic fashion. He made Hulk Hogan look like a total idiot. Clearly, even after his redemption, Shawn wasn't scared to act out when it was completely necessary.